Before we hop into 5-7, we're going to do a quick review, and this is where you are told simplest radical form. So we're going to review this from algebra to remember what we have to do when we are told these instructions. There are three criteria to be determined simplest radical form. The first criteria is that there cannot be any perfect squares hidden underneath the square root. What that means is that you can't have any numbers that you can take the square root of, such as 4, 9, 16, etc. Those can't be under the square root. Secondly, you can't have fractions under the square root, and so you cannot look at the number square root of 1/2. You have to simplify it even further. Also, you can't have square roots in the denominator, which is the bottom of a fraction. When you have a situation like that, you must rationalize. So this video here is going to review how to rationalize and also how to pull out those hidden perfect squares under from the square root. So our first example, we want to simplify the square root of 150. So we're told to find it in simplest radical form. So the first criteria says we cannot have perfect squares hidden under the square root. Now, of course, if you knew the square root of 150, if you typed that into a calculator and it said like 17, then your answer would simply be 17. But it's not that simple. Instead, what we need to do is we need to look for other perfect squares inside of 150. Some of these perfect squares, as I listed before, are the numbers 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, etc. You are looking for any of these numbers inside the number 150, meaning that you can divide 150 by any of these numbers. So can you divide 150 by 4? No. How about 9? No. 16? No. But 25 you can. In fact, you can rewrite this as the square root of 25 times 6. 25 times 6 simply is 150. So all I've done is rewrote our original square root, 25 times 6, which is the same as 150. Now, don't you know the square root of 25? Well, you do. It's 5. And so we can take this 25 out of the square root because we know what that square root is. It is 5. But that 6 was trapped underneath, and so it is stuck. And now again, you look at the 6, and you look to see, can you divide by 4, 9, 16, and you cannot. So 5 square root of 6 is in simplest radical form. So these two are the exact same thing. In fact, all three are the same thing. Just to make it clear that all we did was simplify. All we did was rewrote it, but 5 square root of 6 is in simplest form. And now the second example we're going to do, it says to simplify and it says to rationalize. Now, what we're looking at, look at the second criteria. It says no fractions can be under the square root. So our very first step is that we need to get that fraction out of the square root. So we can rewrite this as simply the square root of 36 over the square root of 5. When you're taking the square root of a fraction, you can break it into two separate square roots. Now, don't you know the square root of 36? It's 6. So on top, we have 6. And now on bottom, or in the denominator, we have the square root of 5. If you look at criteria 3, of the reason why this is not simplest radical form, you cannot have a square root in the denominator, which is the bottom of a fraction. Meaning, we need to rationalize. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our 6 over square root of 5, and we need to multiply it by something. The entire idea is to get rid of that square root of 5. So the only way to do that is, how do you get rid of a square root? Well, you multiply it by another square root. In fact, you multiply it by whatever it is. So you're going to multiply it by square root of 5 on top and on bottom. So on top, we're left with 6 times square root of 5, which is simply 6 square root of 5. The 6 cannot multiply into the 5, so it's not going to be like the square root of 30. That's because the square root kind of blocks everything off. This is over square root of 5 times square root of 5. You could do this two ways. One, you could automatically know that the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is simply 5 by itself. Or you could do it in two steps. And because these are both in the square root signs, you can multiply them together. As opposed to the 6, which is not in the square root, and the 5, which is. So because these are both in the square root, you can multiply them together to be the square root of 25, and which of course we know what the square root of 25 is, which is simply 5. And that's what we said that square root of 5 times square root of 5 would be. Now 6 square root of 5 over 5 is in simplest radical form. So we did simplify, and again, just to make that point, our original expression is the same as our final expression. We have just simplified it. That's all I've got. It should be a review, and maybe that's the simplifying is getting back into your minds. Write down any questions you got. I know I went through quick, but you should have a general idea of how to do all this stuff already.